The lab results landed in my email at 6:47 a.m., and my coffee cup hit the floor before I finished reading the first line. 2 names. 2 probability percentages. One was 99.97%. The other was 0%. I read it 3 times. Then a fourth. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor like my legs just forgot what they were for. My wife, Dana, was still asleep upstairs. Our twins, Mia and Marcus, were in their cribs making those little morning sounds, that soft gurgling that used to be the best part of my day. Now every single sound they made felt like a knife turning slowly in my chest. Because Marcus was mine. The test said so. 99.97%. My blood. My DNA. My son. And Mia was not. Not even close. Not a rounding error. Not a lab mistake. 0.00. I didn't cry. I wanted to. I tried to. But nothing came. It was like my body went into some kind of emergency shutdown mode where the tears couldn't find their way out because the damage was too deep for that. I had ordered the test 3 weeks ago. Not because I suspected Dana. Not because of any fight or any gut feeling or any late night she couldn't explain. I ordered it because my brother-in-law, Dana's own brother Kevin, had gotten drunk at a barbecue and said something stupid. Something like, "Man, it's wild how different those 2 babies look." And then he laughed and walked away like he hadn't just planted a grenade in my brain. I told myself he was drunk. I told myself all babies look different. I told myself I was being paranoid and insecure and that Dana had never given me a single reason to doubt her. Not once in 7 years. But the grenade was already inside me. And it kept ticking. So I ordered the test quietly, discreetly. A home DNA kit, cheek swabs, mailed in under a fake return address. I told myself it would come back normal, and I'd delete the email and never tell a soul, and we'd all move on, and I'd apologize to Dana in my head and be a better husband for it. That was my plan. This was not my plan. I heard Dana's footsteps upstairs, the familiar creak of the 3rd step, then the sound of the bathroom faucet. I had maybe 3 minutes before she came downstairs, and I was still sitting on the kitchen floor in yesterday's clothes holding my phone like it was evidence at a crime scene. Because it was. I stood up, locked my phone, put it face down on the counter, poured a new cup of coffee even though I hadn't touched the first one. And when Dana walked in wearing her gray robe with her hair still messy from sleep, she smiled at me the way she always did. Warm, real, like I was still her person. And I smiled back. I don't know how. To this day, I don't know how my face did that. She said good morning. I said good morning. She kissed my cheek. I let her. She went to check on the babies. I stood in the kitchen and listened to her talk to them in that baby voice she used. All high-pitched and sweet. And I thought about the fact that one of those children in those cribs did not come from me. Did not come from the man she married. Did not come from the person who had been in that delivery room holding her hand and crying happy tears when both of them were born 12 minutes apart. Someone else made Mia. Someone who was not me had been with my wife. And I needed to know who. I spent that entire day being normal. That was the most exhausting thing I've ever done in my life. I fed the babies. I made lunch. I watched Dana fold laundry and laugh at a video on her phone, and I watched her like she was a stranger I was studying, looking for cracks, looking for signs that she knew I knew, looking for any flicker of guilt behind those eyes I had looked into at the altar 7 years ago and said forever, nothing. She was just Dana, just my wife, just the mother of my children, completely unaware that our entire life was built on a floor that had just collapsed. That night after she fell asleep, I went through her phone for the first time in our marriage. I hated myself for every second of it. My hands were shaking so bad I kept mistyping her passcode, which I only knew because she'd given it to me 2 years ago when she was driving and needed me to reply to a text. She'd trusted me with that number, and here I was using it to dig through her life at 1 in the morning while she slept 3 feet away from me. I found nothing. No suspicious messages. No deleted threads. No secret apps hidden in some random folder. Just normal texts. Group chats with her friends. A long thread with her mom. Work emails she'd forwarded to herself. A photo album full of pictures of the babies that she'd clearly been looking at before bed. A photo album full of pictures of Marcus and Mia, my son and someone else's daughter. I put the phone back and lay there in the dark and tried to do the math. Twins from different fathers. isn't actually impossible. I'd looked it up the second I got off the kitchen floor that morning. It has a name: heteropaternal superfecundation. It happens when a woman releases two eggs in the same cycle, and they're each fertilized by sperm from different men within a short window of time. Rare, but real. Documented. It happens. Which meant the timeline was tight. It wasn't some long affair spread over months. It was a specific window, around the time the twins were conceived, which I had calculated, based on their birthday, put us somewhere around Thanksgiving weekend 2.5 years ago. Thanksgiving weekend. I lay there, and I let that date sink into me like cold water. Thanksgiving weekend 2.5 years ago. Dana had gone to visit her college roommate, Priya, for what she called a girls' weekend. I hadn't gone. I'd stayed home, worked on a freelance project, watched football, ordered pizza, called Dana every night, and she'd answered and told me she was having a great time and she missed me and she'd be back Sunday. She'd come back Sunday. 2 weeks later, she was pregnant. I did not sleep that night. The following week, I called my friend Darren. Darren was a private investigator, not in a movie villain way. He was just a guy who'd started a small firm after leaving the police force, and most of his work was insurance fraud and missing persons. But he did this too. He had done this before. He knew how to find people without creating a paper trail. I told him everything. The test, the dates, the girls' weekend. He didn't react the way I expected. No whistles, no raised eyebrows, no "buddy, that's rough." He just listened, took notes, asked 3 clarifying questions, and said he'd look into Priya's social accounts and see if he could reconstruct that weekend from photos or check-ins or tag posts. He called me back in 4 days. There had been a party at Priya's apartment building, some kind of rooftop thing. Dana had been tagged in 2 photos, both taken with her arm around a man named Elliot Graves. Based on Priya's own tag posts, Elliot was a friend of a friend who had apparently been in the city that weekend for a work conference. He had a public Instagram. He was 34. He lived in Denver. He was engaged now to someone else. He had no idea, in all likelihood, that any of this existed. Darren had more. Not proof of what happened, but enough to show that Dana and this man had been in the same place at the same time on the Friday night of that weekend, and that Dana had not mentioned him once. Not in any conversation after that trip. Not when she'd come home. Not when the pregnancy was announced. Not in 2.5 years of living together, sleeping together, raising children together. Not once. I paid Darren. I thanked him. I sat in my car in a parking garage for 45 minutes and did not move. Then I went home and had dinner with my family. I want you to understand something about that dinner. I want you to understand what it feels like to sit across from the person you've loved for nearly a decade, feeding your son mashed sweet potato off a tiny spoon, while your daughter bangs her little hands on her high chair tray, while your wife tells you about her day, while the thing you know sits in your chest like a stone that will never dissolve. You keep eating. You keep nodding. You say, "That's wild, babe," when she tells you about something funny that happened at work. You say, "She's getting so strong," when Mia pushes herself up on her arms during tummy time. You say nothing real. You say nothing true. Because you don't know yet what truth is going to cost everyone in that room, including 2 babies who don't understand any of this and deserve none of it. I went back and forth for 3 weeks on how to handle it. I talked to Darren again. I talked to a divorce attorney named Susan just to understand my options, just to know what the map looked like before I decided whether to start walking. I talked to my older brother Ray, who was the only person in my life I trusted completely with this. Ray's first question was, "Do you still love her?" I didn't answer right away, and Ray said, "That's your answer." He wasn't wrong, but it wasn't that simple either, because the answer was yes. And also, what does that mean now? What does love mean when the person you love did something that changed the architecture of everything? You can't just love your way over that like it's a speed bump. Some things don't get loved over. Some things get walked around for the rest of your life bleeding. My attorney Susan told me that legally, as the presumed father of both twins, I had established paternity for Mia regardless of biology. My name was on her birth certificate. I had been her father from day one in the eyes of the law. Contesting that was possible but complex and would almost certainly require involving Elliot, who was an innocent third party who had no idea this situation existed. I thought about that a lot. About Elliot in Denver living his life, engaged to his person, working his job, having no clue that somewhere in my city there was a little girl who had his nose and his DNA and his blood type. What did he deserve to know? What did he have the right to know? And what would knowing do to his life? Did I have the right to decide that for him? I did not tell Dana for 6 weeks after getting the results. 6 weeks of waking up next to her. 6 weeks of watching her mother my son and someone else's daughter with equal and ferocious love. 6 weeks of watching her be a good mom. A devoted mom. A mom who got up at 3 in the morning without being asked and sang to the babies when they couldn't sleep and made their pediatric appointments and documented every milestone and loved those 2 children with every single cell in her body. None of that made it okay. None of that changed what she had done. But it made it complicated. Everything was complicated. I finally told her on a Sunday morning. The babies were at my mother-in-law's house for a scheduled overnight visit, which I had helped arrange specifically because I knew I was going to have this conversation and I did not want them in the house when it happened. I set the printed lab results on the kitchen table. I set the screenshot Darren had sent me of Dana and Elliot at that party right next to it. And I sat down and I waited. She walked in, saw my face, and stopped moving. She didn't ask what was wrong. She looked at the table. She looked at the papers. And something in her face broke open like a window that had been holding pressure for 2.5 years. She started crying before she sat down. That told me everything I needed to know about whether it was true. She didn't deny it. I'll give her that. When the lying would have been easier. When she could have said the test was wrong. When she could have said she didn't know who that guy was in the photo. When she could have fought me on every point. She didn't. She sat down and she put her face in her hands and she cried. The kind of cry that comes from a place that has nothing to do with performance. She said it had happened once. One night at that party. She said she had been drinking. She said she and I had been in a rough place that fall, which was true. We had been going through a period where we weren't really connecting, and I had been working too much and she had felt invisible and I hadn't handled that well. She said she didn't plan it. She said she had hated herself every day since. She said she had told herself when she found out she was pregnant that it was mine, that it had to be mine, that she would never let herself consider any other possibility. She said she had convinced herself hard enough that she had actually started to believe it. I asked her if she knew about heteropaternal superfecundation. She didn't know the word, but she said she had looked up whether it was possible for twins to have different fathers. After the pregnancy was confirmed, she had looked it up. She had read about it. And then she had closed the browser and decided to never think about it again. She had chosen ignorance as a protection strategy. She had made herself not know. And in not knowing, she had made me not know. She had made me raise a child who was not mine with love I had signed up to give only to her. I said that out loud. I said, "You made that choice for me. You took away my right to know." She didn't argue. She just kept crying and saying she was sorry over and over in different ways, in different tones, with different levels of composure. For most of that day, I slept in the guest room. That night, and the night after that, and the 12 nights after that. On the 15th night, I came back to our room. Not because I had forgiven her. Not because I had decided what we were doing. But because I had decided that punishing myself by sleeping in a smaller bed was not a productive form of processing grief. The 3 months that followed were the hardest of my life. We started couples therapy with a woman named Dr. Okafor, who had a very calm voice and who did not let either of us get away with anything. She made Dana say out loud, in a clinical setting, what she had done and how she had handled the aftermath. She made me say out loud what I was grieving. Not just the betrayal, the fantasy, the version of my marriage I had believed in, the uncomplicated version of fatherhood I had thought I was living. Dr. Okafor said something in one of our sessions that I have never forgotten. She said, "The question is not just whether you can trust her again. The question is whether the two of you can build something new, not repair the old thing. That old thing is gone. Something new." I turned that over in my head for weeks. Then came the question of Elliot. Dana said she didn't want to contact him. She was afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of what he would want. Afraid of disrupting Mia's life with some external claim she couldn't control. She said Mia had a father. She was looking at him. But I kept thinking about Elliot in Denver not knowing. I kept thinking about medical history. About the things a child deserves to know about, where she comes from, about a man who had a daughter he'd never seen and had never been given the choice to see. Ray said, "You don't owe that man anything." My attorney Susan said it was a personal decision with no legal obligation on my part. Dr. Okafor said it was a values question that only I could answer. I answered it. I found Elliot's email through his company website. He was a project manager at an engineering firm. His email format was standard. I wrote him a message that took me 9 drafts over 2 weeks. I told him only what was essential. I told him that I was not angry at him. I told him that I believed he was unaware of the situation. At the time, I told him that I was still figuring out what my own future looked like, but that there was a child, and that he deserved to know a child existed. And what he did with that information was entirely his choice. He replied in 6 hours. He was shocked. He asked if the test was definitive. I sent him the lab report. He went quiet for 4 days. Then he wrote back and said he needed time to process this and asked if he could eventually have contact with Mia down the line. Not immediately, but eventually, if everyone was willing. I forwarded that email to Dana without comment. She cried for an hour. Then she wrote back and said she understood. That was 3 months ago. Where are we now? I get asked that. Not in real life. Because almost no one in real life knows this whole story. But in my own head, I ask myself that every single morning. Here is the honest answer. Dana and I are still in the same house. We are still in therapy. We are still working through something that I don't have a clean name for because it is not fully reconciliation, and it is not fully ending, and it lives somewhere in the uncomfortable, unresolved middle where real life often insists on putting you. I love Marcus with everything I have. He is my son in every sense. He has my chin. He has Dana's laugh. He is beginning to point at things and say a version of that. That sounds like dat. And every single time he does it, I could collapse from how much I love him. I love Mia too. That is the part one did not expect and could not have predicted and have had to sit with in ways that still confuse me. She is not biologically mine. She is the product of a betrayal that changed my life. And she is also a 1-year-old who reaches her arms up for me when I walk into the room. She is also a person who had nothing to do with any of this. She is also someone I have held during every fever and every nightmare and every immunization appointment. She is also mine in the only way that has ever actually mattered to her. Biology did not make me her father. Presence did. I did not ask for that. But it is true anyway. The moral dilemma I am left with is not one that has a clean answer, and I have stopped trying to find one. It is this. Dana did something unforgivable, and she is also the mother of my children. And she is also someone who has spent 2.5 years carrying a secret that destroyed her from the inside, even while she was smiling. And she is also someone who chose, when confronted, to tell the truth instead of fight. None of that erases what she did. None of that gives her a free pass. None of that means I am obligated to stay. But here is the question I cannot stop asking myself. The one I am leaving here because I genuinely don't know the answer. If you found out the person you love made the worst choice of their life, once, in a moment of weakness, in a marriage that was already cracking, and then lived every day since in silent guilt while loving you and your children as hard as they possibly could, is the right thing to leave? Or is the right thing to decide who you want to be on the other side of someone else's worst moment? I'm not asking for permission. I am asking because I genuinely want to know what you think the answer is. Because I'm still in that kitchen. I'm still reading that email. And I'm still trying to figure out where you go after the floor disappears beneath you.